All right, so good morning. Today is June 8th, happens to be my birthday. To celebrate my birthday, we're going to learn Daf Tzadik Gimel of Yevamos, 93. We are a couple lines up, 4 lines up from the bottom of Tzadik Bet Amabet. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. And yesterday we learned a statement by Rabbi Nanai. So let me open this. Here we go. And Rabbi Yanai ruled that a widow who's awaiting Yibum. So again, Ruvain and Rachel were married. Ruvain dies without children. Rachel has the opportunity to marry, to do Yibum or Chalitza with Ruvain's brother Shimon. And so she's awaiting that to happen, but she engages, or she at least attempts to engage in Kiddushin with another man, with somebody who's not Shimon. We'll call this other man, Dror. So Dror decides, hey, I want to marry Rachel. And so he says, he attempts to say, Harei at mikudeshet li b'tabat zu kedas Moshe Yisrael. He says the whole language of everything that he needs to say in order to marry her. Well, Rabbi Yanai says that because that action is not permitted in the Torah, we're going to treat it as a null, as if it didn't exist, as if nothing happened, nothing legally happened. Now, Rabbi Yochanan then says, hey, we have a Mishnah that supports that idea. And one of the things that it says in that Mishnah says, if a person says, I am hereby married to you after your Yavam performs Chalitza, the statement has no legal effect. And we concluded with Rabbi Yanai responding that, okay, you are right that Mishnah supports my conclusion, but don't say that my statement is unnecessary, because in fact, if I had not made my statement about the fact that a marriage to somebody who is awaiting Yibum is a null, has no legal effect. If I had not made that statement, you would not have understood that Mishnah in the way you're now understanding it. Right now, you understand that when it says, I am hereby married to you after your Yavam performs Chalitza, you're saying the reason that doesn't work is because I cannot marry the person right now. But if I could marry the person right now, well, then it would work. But in fact, if I had not made my statement saying that there's a problem with a Yevamah, a woman who's awaiting Yibum, marrying somebody who is not the Yavam, who's not the person who's supposed to do Yibum with her, if I had not made that statement that has no legal effect, you would have thought that when it says, I am hereby married to you after your Yavam performs Chalitza, that the problem with it is because this is something that doesn't yet exist in the world. Meaning, when there is an issue in Jewish law about future contracts and the extent to which one can engage in a contract for something that does not yet exist. So the classic example, of course, is food, is crops. I talked to you in September when you're just planting the new crops that are going to grow the following spring, and I say I want to buy your crops from you. So those are things that don't yet exist, and so as a result, even if according to at least some views of halacha, and indeed we're going to get into that detail much more today, there is no ability for me to make that kind of contract because it's a davar shelo ba la'olam. And not only that, not only do we say that now that's a clear case of davar shelo ba'olam, it doesn't even exist, right? You look at your apple tree and there are no apples on it, and you're trying to sell the apples that are going to grow from the tree. But it also exists when the facts in the world that are necessary for something to happen haven't yet happened. So, for example, let's say you were to say to me, I want to sell you this piece of property, which I don't yet own. Now, that piece of property exists, but I don't own it yet. And so as a result, for all intents and purposes in our conversation, it is a davar shelo ba'olam. And so as a result, we're now going to dive into this issue in much more greater detail and talk about a variety of cases of davar shelo ba'olam and people who say that actually you can engage in a transaction with respect to something that is a davar shelo ba'olam. Okay, and so we're going to see that. Now, this is particularly relevant because immediately we are going to see that Reish Lakish argues with the statement that Rabbi Yochanan made. Rabbi Yochanan, in a classic, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish were the classic disputants. So what Rabbi Yochanan said that the Mishnah, when it says after your Yavam performs chalitza with you, I'm going to marry you, that's not a legal thing, and that's a proof to Rabbi Yanai's statement. Well, Reish Lakish is going to say it's not really a proof because maybe it's consistent with somebody else and has nothing to do with the question of the general viewpoint of whether kedushin exists between a Yevamah and someone other than her Yavam. So let's take a look. So we're at Amar Le Reish Lakish, 4 lines up on Tzadik Bet, Amar Bet, and now we're ready to get going. So Amar Le Reish Lakish says to Rabbi Yochanan, who tried to bring the proof from the Mishnah, where it says that after your Yavam performs chalitza, if I say that we're married after your Yavam performs chalitza, that it's not a valid wedding and not a valid marriage, not a legal effect, that there's no legal effect to it. So Ilav de Kalsach Gavra Rabba, if not for the fact that Rabbi Yanai, a great person like Rabbi Yanai, has praised you, Rabbi Yochanan, and said that you were right, Haba Amina Lach Ana, I would have told you that Masnis and Rabbi Akiva, I would have said the Mishnah is not a proof to Rabbi Yanai's statement. The Mishnah is simply Rabbi Akiva. Da Amar Ein Kedushin Tovsin B'chai Be'lavin, because Rabbi Akiva says that a Kedushin doesn't happen with respect to something that is prohibited. We've seen this throughout our Masechet, that Rabbi Akiva has a broader view of the concept of mamzer and has a broader view of when we say that a marriage is not a legal entity, and that whenever there's a prohibition, there would be no legal entity. And since the husband, who is not the Yavam, is trying to marry the Yevamah, who is still awaiting Yibum or Chalitza from the Yavam, that is a prohibited marriage. So as a result, that prohibited marriage has no legal effect. But now the Gemara says back to Reish Lakish, but the Rabbi Akiva, if you, Reish Lakish, wanted to say that it was in fact Rabbi Akiva, or it could even be Reish Lakish is continuing his thought to show that actually maybe it couldn't be Rabbi Akiva. So what would be the problem? Well, after your Yavam performs chalitza for you, so then litfasei ba kedushay. You're right that kedushin can't happen when she's waiting for chalitza, but here the kedushin is explicitly said to take effect after the chalitza. Dahashamin and Leila Rabbi Akiva, because we've heard that Rabbi Akiva says the following: Da'amar Adam Machna Davar Shelo Ba'olam, because we know that a person can transfer something that has not yet come to the world. So, in fact, Reish Lakish, your effort to try and say that this Mishnah is actually Rabbi Akiva, and it's talking about a situation because the action is prohibited, therefore the marriage doesn't take effect. That doesn't work, because in fact, Rabbi Akiva does say that something that is not yet come into the world can be transferred. And so as a result, when the person says, when the potential husband, when Dror says to Rachel, I want to marry you after Shimon does chalitza with you, and consider our marriage now but it'll take effect once the chalitza happens. So because even though that is something that has not yet come into the world, meaning that the woman has not yet had chalitza, and so as a result, she is not yet free to engage in the marriage, but because we can sell something that is, we can engage in a transaction with respect to something that hasn't yet happened, according to Rabbi Akiva, we actually can do this marriage. And so there's no reason that this Mishnah has to be like Rabbi Akiva. Indeed, the Mishnah could be not like Rabbi Akiva. Indeed, the Mishnah seems to disagree with Rabbi Akiva. And how do we know that Rabbi Akiva says that something that has not yet come into the world can be transferred? Ditzanan, because we have the following Mishnah. This Mishnah is in Nidarim, and it says, Konam shani osel leficha ein tzarech lahafer. That the Tanakama of this Mishnah says that if a wife says to her husband, my produce, the produce that I make, is going to be prohibited to you, and so I'm swearing that anything that I produce, you're not allowed to benefit from. Ein tzarech lahafer. The Tanakama says there is no need for the husband to revoke the vow because it has no effect. Because, why doesn't it have an effect? It doesn't have an effect because the husband has a right, already owns the right to his wife's produce, to what the work produce of the wife. But Rabbi Akiva Omer Yafer. Rabbi Akiva says, no, he does have to revoke it. Shema Tadif Alav Yoser Min Haroilo. Maybe she will produce more produce than a typical woman produces. And the man only has the right to a typical amount of produce. He doesn't have, and by the way, in Maseches Kedushin, we will learn that a man has the right to the produce of his wife effectively in exchange for his obligation to support her financially and ensure that she has food to eat. And so as a result, Rabbi Akiva is saying, because she might produce extra, and of course that extra doesn't exist now, so this is a davar shelo bala olam. Because she might produce extra, as a result, even though that extra does not exist at this moment, the vow would be a valid vow. And so as a result, in order to undo it, the husband needs to, there's a rule that a husband has the ability to undo a vow when he first hears it from his wife, the first time he learns about the vow. So so as a result, he must undo it. So again, the Tanakama says he doesn't have to undo it because the vow is not regarding something that exists today, and anything that exists today is produce that the wife already has effectively transferred to her husband. Rabbi Akiva says, no, maybe there will be something that she will produce that doesn't necessarily go to her husband, and as a result, the vow would eventually take effect on that. So again, we see that the vow takes effect even though it might relate to something that doesn't yet exist. Now, Reish Lakish responds and says, no, ha idmar Allah, Amar Rav Huna Brei de Rav Yoshua, Bo'meres Yakadshu Yadai Le'oseihem. We're not talking about where she's saying that my future produce should be prohibited to you, but rather my hands should be considered consecrated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and as a result, anything that they produce will no longer go to you. The Yadayim is Nehu Ba'alma, because of course hands are something that exists in the world, and so maybe you could say that Rabbi Akiva understands that statement of Konam Sha'ani Osa Leficha, that the vow of my handwork of what I make should not go to you, is not referring to the future produce that doesn't exist, but rather to her hands, which do exist. And so as a result, maybe you don't have to say that this Mishnah proves that Rabbi Akiva says Davar Shelo Bola Olam is something that can be makna, is something that can be transferred. Okay, but in fact, we're going to now see Ufligi de Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. That understanding of that Reish Lakish offers of this Mishnah disagrees with Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. The Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So now we're going to spend most of the rest of today dealing with what this statement. Rav Huna Kirav. Rav Huna agrees with Rav. The Rav to Rabbi Yanai, and Rav agrees with Rabbi Yanai. So again, A equals B equals C. We're going to see 8 different people who all agree. Rabbi Yanai to Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia to Rabbi. Rabbi to Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov to Rabbi Akiva. And what do they all say? So what do Rav Huna, Rav, Rabbi Yanai, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and Rabbi Akiva all say? The Amar Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bolam. They all 8 of them say that a person can transfer something that has not yet come to the world. And so now we're going to spend the rest of today, much of the rest of today, going through these 8 opinions to show that they in fact have this opinion that a person has the ability to transfer something that doesn't yet exist. So let's take, and that transfer can take a lot of different forms. It can be a sale. It can be the taking of trumas and maestros. It can be, those are the 2 big ones. But we'll see that there are lots of different forms that this can happen. So Rav Huna Maihi, what's the ruling of Rav Huna that says that Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bolam? Because we have the following statement: if you sell the fruit of a date palm, so remember that was the apple tree case that I mentioned earlier, right? You sell the dates before the dates have grown on the palm tree. So Amar Rav Huna ad shelo ba'al olam, until those fruit actually come into existence, yachol lachzor bo. You are able, the seller can withdraw from the sale. Mishibol olam. But once they come into existence, Einu Yachol Lachzor Bo, then you're not able to come because the sale has taken effect. So as a result, even though the sale was instituted prior to the fruit existing, we see a person can in fact transfer something that doesn't yet exist. But Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman says, Af Mishibol Olam. No, even once the fruit comes into existence, Yachol Lachzor, you can withdraw. Why? Because he says that Adam lo makna davar shelo bolam. You cannot transfer something that has not come into the world, and so as a result, it is not an enforceable contract. But Amar Rav Nachman Modina de Ishamet v'achil lo mapkina mine. However, if the buyer were to have taken those dates and eaten them, well, then obviously you can't undo that. And so that would be considered a valid contract. Okay, so that is the proof for Rav Huna. Now we go to Rav. Rav was number 2. So Rav, the Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav. Rav Huna said in the name of Rav, this field which I am going to purchase, when I purchase it, it's going to be retroactively belongs to you. Kana. The field, in fact, does go to the transferee. And so as a result, even though that transfer has happened before the person actually acquired the field, we allow a transfer even of something that doesn't yet exist. So that is Rav. Next, we're going to hear about Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Yanai to Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Chia agree to Rabbi Yanai Havale Arisa. Rabbi Yanai had a sharecropper. He would have somebody who was taking care of his field, and the sharecropper would get a portion of the field, and the sharecropper would give to Rabbi Yanai a portion of the field in exchange for the right to grow food on Rabbi Yanai's field. Dahavi mighty lay kanta de pere kol male shabta. Every Erev Shabbos, every Friday, the sharecropper would bring a basket of fruit. So ahu yama nigale. One time the sharecropper was late. Now this fruit is coming directly from the field, and so as a result, Rabbi Yanai needs to take trumas and maasros from the fruit. Velo asa, and now this guy was delayed and he didn't come. So what did he do? What did Rabbi Yanai do? Shakal asar mipere devese alayhu. He said, listen, I know that the guy is going to bring one basket. So I'm going to take a tenth of a basket that I have in my house, and I will say that it will constitute the meiser on that basket when it eventually comes. So Asala Kameh to Rabbi Chia, and then Rabbi Yanai came and told Rabbi Chia what he did. So Amrle Shaper Abata. And Rabbi Chia said, you did the right thing. Titanya, Leman Tilma Yilira as Hashem Elokecha Kol Hayamim. Because we have a pasuk, the pasuk's in Sefer Dvarim, and it says that you should learn to fear Hashem all the days. So Elu Shabbosos v'Yom Tov, that these days that it's talking about are Shabbos and Yom Tov. And so what does it mean to fear Hashem all of those days? So Lamai Hilchasa, what is this trying to teach us? Now, that if it is telling you to say that you can actually take trumas and maasros on Shabbos and then eat it, the fact that we don't take trumas and maasros on Shabbos is only because the rabbis say that it's prohibited. The Torah doesn't anywhere say that you're not allowed to do it. So the Torah has no need to go out of its way and tell us that it's permitted, because of course it's permitted. It's not prohibited anywhere. So it's only prohibited rabbinically. And so now we turn to Tzadik Gimel Amud Bet, Elav ki hai gavna. So Rabbi Chia is telling Rabbi Yanai that it's specifically in this instance that it's telling us that we can do exactly this thing, that even though the produce has not yet arrived, and ordinarily, by the way, you're not allowed to, you have to have all the produce together in order to take the trumos and maasros. You can't take trumas and maasros on produce that is located in city 1 on the produce that's located in city 2. You need it to all be together. And so as a result, that's the Gemara is that what the pasuk is telling us is that when that would undermine your joy of Yom Tov and Shabbos, well, then we're going to say that you're allowed to do it. So Amar Le Baha Akruyan Bechelma Kana Ratzitz. But Rabbi Yanai says to Rabbi Chia, listen, I had a dream that makes me think that I did something wrong, because the words that came to me in a dream are kaneh ratzutz, a splintered cane, a splintered reed. Okay, so what is that? So my love hachik amrili, isn't that a reference to the following pasuk, to a pasuk in Melachim where it talks about a negative aspect of a reed? Hinei v'tachta l'cha al mishenes hakaneh haratzutz hazeh, that the Jewish people had relied on the support of this splintered reed, meaning that that we were relying on the king of Egypt. This is a message sent by Sancherib to King Chizkiah, that Chizkiah was relying on the king of Egypt for assistance, and that was going to be useless because a reed is such a weak object. So Rabbi Chia says back, no, you're misunderstanding the words that came to you in a dream. Lo hachikamri lach. It wasn't that pasuk that it was referring to. Taner ratzutz lo yishbor ufishtacheha lo yichabena. No, it was from the pasuk in Yeshaya, which also references a splintering reed. But there, the concept of the splintering reed is that it will not break and it will not nor extinguish flickering flax. That the idea is that in fact there is a durability to a reed. The fact that a reed has that flexibility, yes, it means you can't rely on it. It's not going to hold you up, but it will withstand everything that the world can bring to it because it has the ability to bend and flexibility. And what your dream was telling you is that in fact this is the right way, that it was the correct thing that you ruled. Now, this all leads into an interesting discussion of the role that dreams can play. Meaning, was Rabbi Chia saying that in fact the dream was a real validity, or was he saying, no, look, just as you could come up with a positive, I can come up with a negative read, I could come up with a positive read. And indeed, we often say that in Maseches Brachos, I think we saw the idea that dreams do not, or dreams have the meaning that we give to them, or maybe that aren't supposed to paskin based on them. In any event, the bottom line is that we see from all of this that Rabbi Yanai and Rabbi Chia both agree that when it comes to taking tithes, we could take tithes with respect to something that had not yet come into the world. We had not, the new basket had not yet been delivered to Rabbi Yanai, and yet he was allowed to take Trumas and Maestros, because even you can do a transaction even with respect to something that has not yet come into the world. So that is now numbers 3 and number 4. And so now we turn to number 5, Rebbe Ditanya lo saskir evet el adonav. The pasuk tells us that you're not allowed to give a slave back to his master. So Rebbe Omer v'lokeach evet al manasa shachuro hakasu medaber. That the pasuk is really talking about somebody who purchases a slave on condition that he's going to free him, and so as a result, that's the situation where we're going to say that he's not allowed to maintain him. Because the pasuk continues, take a look at Rashi, first of the narrow lines, end of the line. Al manasal shachuro umusar. The pasuk comes and warns that you're not allowed to work him, and so as a result, who is it that you're not allowed to work? If you commit to free somebody and then you buy them, even though you committed to free them before you purchased them, as a result, we're going to say that you're not allowed to work the person because the transaction that you did, namely the idea that you were going to free them, is something that you've already done. And so as a result, it's as if davar shelo bala olam is being transferred. So heichi dami. Now we're going to explain what exactly the circumstances are in this case. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak de Kasav lei. We're talking about where the purchaser wrote this for the slave. The language in the freedom document, when I purchase you, you are acquired by yourself from now. So as a result, the fact that I don't own you now doesn't prevent me from transferring that ownership now to you retroactively, even though I don't even own you now. So Rebbe Meir, all right, so that's number 5. Now we see that Rebbe also holds this concept of Adam Makna Shadavar Shalo Bala Olam. So Rebbe Meir, what about number 6? So Titania, we have a brisa. Ha-omer, all right, Ha-omer leisha harei at mikudeshes li la'achar she'esgayer. I am going to marry you after I convert. La'achar she'tisgairi. I'm going to marry. You should be married to me after you convert. La'achar she'eshtachrer. I'm going to be and marry you after I am freed, but I'm currently a slave. or la'achar shetish tachariri, or after you are freed, la'achar sheyamus ba'alech, or after your husband dies, or la'achar shetamus achasech, or after your sister dies to whom I married, la'achar sheyachlotz lecha yevamot, or after your yavam performs chalitza. All of these eina mekudeshes. According to the Tanakama, they are not considered a marriage. However, Rebbe Meir Omer mikudeshes, all of them are considered a marriage. Why are they considered a marriage? Because a marriage can happen even when one does not yet have any, when the facts on the ground aren't yet such that they could get married. Because it's going to happen, we're going to allow the transaction to take place now. And so as a result, even though the woman is still married to her husband, and the guy says, I'm going to marry you from the time that your husband dies, and she accepts, that is a valid marriage according to Rebbe Meir, because when the husband dies, it's still a transaction. You can do a transaction. You can make legal obligations even about something that hasn't yet happened. And so as a result, again, we see that Rebbe Meir says, Adam makna davar shelo ba'al olam. A person can engage in a transaction with respect to something that has not yet come to the world. Rabbi Eliezer, so finishing up, we've got two left to go. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, he says, Tanya, we have a brisa. Yes, Yasser al-Kain. Moreover, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. What else did Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov say? Afilu im Amar Peres Aruga Zo Tilushin Yehu Truma al Peres Aruga Zo Mechubarim. Although, and now let's back up and just note, ordinarily one is not allowed to take trumas and meisters from food that is still on the tree or still in the ground, or for food that is not yet, that has already been removed, that is already cut. You're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to take truma that's attached at all, frankly. You have to wait until it's cut. So now when I say let the cut fruit of this row become truma for the attached fruit of this other row, O Peres Arugazu Mechubarim, Al Peres Arugazu Telushin. Or I say let the attached fruits of this row are truma for the cut fruits of the other row. When the fruit that is attached grows to an age of a third, and then they're picked, and the fruit, when they grow to a third and they're picked, davarav kayamim. So at this moment, effectively nothing has happened because the fruit is still attached. But once I detach it from the ground or from the tree, then my truma designation that I did before it was detached suddenly takes effect. And what does that mean? Again, it means a person can engage in a transaction with respect to something that does not yet exist in the world. Rebbe Akiva. What about Rebbe Akiva? So he was number 8. Well, we're going to cite the Mishnah that we cited at the beginning. Ditnan, we're going to disagree with Reish Lakish, and we're going to cite this Mishnah. Konam sha'ani osa lafticha, the handiwork that I make will be now prohibited to you. The Tanakama says you don't need to revoke the vow because either it's a davar shelo ba'al or it's something that that the husband already owns. She doesn't have any property rights into it. So Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says no, Yafer, she does have to revoke it. Because maybe she'll make extra, and therefore she'll be entitled to that extra, and therefore that's something that would become prohibited to her husband. And so as a result, if he doesn't undo the vow immediately, that vow will take effect. So now we've shown all 8 opinions. Okay, so now in the Mishnah, that's the topic of Adam Davar Shelo Ba'al Olam, Adam Makna Davar Shelo Ba'al Olam, and now we return back to the question of marrying based on a single witness. Now we said in our Mishnah that we allowed a woman to remarry based on the testimony of a single witness, and now the Gemara is going to ask, do we say the same thing with respect to Yibum? Meaning, if Reuven goes abroad, has no children with Rachel, and now a single witness testifies to his death, do we allow the wife to perform yibum with the first husband's brother? Do we say that that Rachel now needs to do yibum or chalitza with Shimon, or do we say we only have one witness, and one witness is not enough to cause yibum? Now, why would we think that? So let's take a look inside, and we'll offer the two sides to this argument. So, Rav Sheshes, they were asked of Rav Sheshes, Ad Eid Echad b'Yevamah Mahu. What about if we're dealing with a situation where a woman would become a Yevamah, where her husband has no children? Would we say in that situation that she undergoes yibum? So, time of the Eid Echad. Do we say that because there's one witness, that a witness will not testify falsely about something that is going to be revealed? Meaning, if everybody is going to know whether or not the woman's husband is really alive, meaning nobody's going to testify that the husband died if he's really alive, because everybody will eventually discover the fact that he's really alive. So v'hachanami, so here too, since we say that with respect to a woman and allow her to remarry, we'll say it here too with respect to yibum. So lo mashaker, the guy's not going to lie. Oh Dilma, time of the Eid Echad, or maybe the reason that we allow a single witness, mishum de'ihi daika uminasva, that in fact the reason that we allow the single witness is because we say that she is going to double check and make sure that everything is correct before she marries. That is, that will trigger the investigation, and now she'll fully investigate, and she's only going to marry if in fact her investigation confirms the single witness's testimony. But that sometimes she will have compassion and be, and feel a sense of love towards her brother-in-law. So maybe lo daiku minasva, maybe she won't investigate, because after all, this is she feels bad that and she feels a sense of connection with her husband's family, and now this has an opportunity to continue that connection, and so maybe she won't do the same kind of investigation, and as a result, she will just go ahead with the yibum, and we're worried about that, and so maybe we shouldn't believe the single witness in this case. So Amar Lahu Rav Sheshes. So Rav Sheshes now provides the answer for us, and what does he say? Tanisua, we have our Mishnah, the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, is going to give us the answer. What did it say? Amru la meis b'nei. Initially, they told her that her son died, v'achar kach meis balech, and afterwards your husband died. And so what does that mean? V'nisyavma, and so she did yibum, meaning that, again, we had a situation where, and we're going to distinguish what this situation is in a moment, but the point is Reuven went away. So they come and tell her that unfortunately Reuven and his son Menachem, they both died, and Menachem died first. And so as a result, since that was the only child of Reuven, so as a result, now Reuven now Rachel has an obligation of yibum, and so as a result, she does yibum with Shimon. And unfortunately, what did we learn about in our Mishnah? We learned about very unfortunate situations. But then afterwards, they said to her, "Oh my gosh, we got it reversed. It was actually the husband died first, and then the son died." Well, that makes a big difference, because when Reuven died, Menachem was still alive, and so when Menachem was still alive, so that means there's no yibum any longer. So she's not only is she doesn't do yibum with Shimon, she's not allowed to marry Shimon, because a man is not allowed to marry his brother's ex-wife except in the context of yibum. So as a result, she needs to leave. Rachel needs to leave Shimon. The Havlad Rishon v'Achron Mamzer. and the child before or after is a mamzer, whether she learns about the relationship, about the flipping order before she has a child or after she has a child, that child is a mamzer. Now, hechidami. So Reb Sheshes now clarifies why is this in fact the proof that we say that one witness is sufficient. If you say that initially there were two witnesses who said that the husband, that the child died first, and then the husband died, and then two other witnesses came and said no, the order was reversed. We have two valid sets of witnesses. We don't know who to rely on. So how do you know to rely on the second set? Maybe we should rely on the first set. The ode, mamzer. And moreover, in connection with the mamzer, why are you saying that child is definitely a mamzer? Suffolk mamzer who? He's only maybe a mamzer, because we have two witnesses that say one order, two witnesses that say the other order. The order makes a big difference, because if you get the order wrong, it's a mamzer, but we don't know which is the order, because we have two witnesses one way and two witnesses the other way. So it's a Suffolk mamzer. It's not a definite mamzer. And if you want to say that our Mishnah was not being precise, and really it means that it's a Suffolk mamzer, but we have the end of the Mishnah, meaning in every case we talk about harishon mamzer va'achron ein mamzer. We talk about whether or not did you know whether the learning about what happened before the child was born or after the child was born. Shmamina Davka Katani. We are being very precise in this Mishnah in connection with whether, when exactly this child is born. So don't say that this is not a precise Mishnah. So Elalav Shmamina Chad. It's got to be talking about where there was only one witness initially and then two witnesses at the end. And so that explains why we initially believe the one witness, because there was just one witness, so we'll believe him. But then we want to make sure, as we've seen, that we have compassion for the woman, and we don't want her to be an aguna, and so as a result, we'll allow her to get married. However, when two witnesses come and reverse the order, well, then we'll believe the two witnesses, and because the two witnesses always trump one witness. So v'taimu de'asu beitrei achushe, and the reason that we are going to reject the original witness is because two witnesses came and refuted. Halav haki mehemen. But without that, we would have believed the single witness. Meaning that if one witness comes and says that Reuven, who has gone out of town, has died, and Reuven and Rachel have no children, even though it's only one witness, we will say that Rachel can do Yibum with Shimon. And so we see that even one witness is sufficient to trigger a woman to undergo Yibum. So now tomorrow, stay tuned as we will discuss more about this question of one witness in connection with Yibum. And then we're going to discuss the reverse case. We've been talking about where the man goes away and the man the report comes back that the man is dead. What happens if we're talking about the woman goes overseas and we learn that the woman is dead, or maybe she's not? So for all of that, stay tuned tomorrow.
It was interesting today, Rabbi, about contracts, about if you make a contract for something that doesn't exist yet, it has a lot of application for today's law.
Absolutely.
So much of that is applicable when we study contracts and law today, I would assume.
100%. That you're absolutely right. And it's really, when you learn Talmud, you really see how much foresight there was in the halakhic system for issues that come up today. And this is definitely one of them. That ordinarily, if I have a pen in my hand, it's clear I can transfer it to you. But what happens if this pen doesn't belong to me? It belongs to somebody else. What rights do I have to sell my future rights in this pen?
Right.
Do we say that who knows what'll happen? And one can understand why. We have the idea of possession is 9/10 of the law. And so if I don't have possession, that maybe I don't have any rights to it. And so it's a fascinating discussion.
It is a fascinating. Where I was reading about it, not that I'm a big racehorse fan, but if a horse is giving a pedigree horse, a top performer is giving birth to a foal, people bid on the birth of the foal. They buy the foal at a set price before the foal is even dropped. And if the foal comes out lame, heaven forbid, there's still money to be paid. Now, whether it's the original amount that you agreed upon is another story, but they're bidding on a sight unseen, if you will, or
Yep.
they're signing a contract for a sight unseen. And very
Absolutely.
often it is what it is, if you will.
Correct, exactly. Similarly with futures contracts with respect to produce,
Right.
so many things. And so it's a very, thankfully, we actually paskin like these 8
Yeah, I
opinions
know.
that Adam Magna Davar Shelo Ba'Olam, that we do allow someone to make a transaction with respect to something.
I had an interesting last point, then I'll leave you be.
Please.
I have a neighbor who owns a home in the Bronx. Anyway, make a long story short, she entered a contract a while ago for heating oil, fuel oil for the house at something like $2.60 a gallon, so she locked in. So the supplier comes to her and says, I can't make good on $2.60 a gallon now because my cost it might be $6 a gallon now for home heating oil. So he says, listen, I'm trying to give all my customers an even break here, but I might have to raise you a little bit in order just to cover the rest of my contract. So she's in dispute with him. But it's, a contract is a contract. It's very difficult decisions here.
Correct. He had an obligation to take out an insurance contract or
right.
and protect himself. He had the obligation to engage in his own futures contract. Effectively, he's taking advantage of the fact that he made a bet and chose not to insure his side of the bet. And now, now he's trying to get out of it. I'm very sympathetic with her position.
Me too. Anyway, with that, I'll bid you a good day.
I wish you a Yishakach. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. Very interesting questions about, when do we say, and it raises issues of like, when do we say that there's a mistake that, I thought that X was going to happen and Y was going to happen and Y instead happened, and when do we?
And just the question is, how legally binding is a contract? I mean, under what circumstances can a contract be broken? That's also a very interesting topic.
Correct. And in that regard, the point is like, what are the implicit terms of the contract? Correct. Because even though a contract has its explicit terms, there are often implicit terms. There's an understanding that, what happens in the case of, God forbid, nuclear war? What happens in the case of, the government comes and takes all of our property away, et cetera, et cetera. So,
or a natural disaster,
100%. Often those are not listed in the contract, and we try to figure out what exactly was the implicit aspect of the contract. And so all of those are very interesting questions, and questions that the Gemara itself tries to deal with of that. And that's, again, why learning Talmud is so helpful from a legal perspective to understand law today, but also so inspiring to understand how the rabbis were able to give all these thoughts, so many centuries ago, and it still feels so relevant.
When do we study contracts in Talmud? I'm sure there's.
Yes. So we will be dealing with that in Seder Nezikin. There'll be some of that, I think, in Gittin because and Kedushin, because of course there's the the ketubah, which is itself a contract, but I believe that in Nezikin we'll be getting into it in even greater sense.
Thank you. I'll see you
All right.
tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Be well. That's when we're going to be dealing with sort of like sale contracts. So that's in Nezikin. So we'll be seeing a lot of that then.
Thank you. Be
All right.
well.
Great day. Be well.